The airport was filled with the usual rush, families boarding, travelers racing to gates, but in the middle of it all, a single bark froze the entire terminal. A police K-9 had locked onto a grandmother holding a baby. At first, no one understood why, but the more the dog barked, the more uneasy the officers became. Something about the way the baby cried, the way the blanket shifted, it didn't feel right. And then, when they finally looked closer, what they uncovered left the entire terminal in shock. But yes, you'll want to stick around until the very end because the twist connects everything in a way you'll never see coming. The airport was buzzing with its usual rhythm, families rushing to gates, business travelers glued to phones, security staff weaving through lines. Yet within this normal chaos, something unusual unfolded that silenced the crowd in an instant. A police K-9 named Shadow, trained to detect threats hidden from human eyes, was patrolling near the International Arrivals Hall with his handler. Shadow was steady, calm, and disciplined, a dog whose instincts rarely faltered. But on this particular day, something jolted him out of that composure. As an elderly woman stepped through the terminal holding a bundled baby close to her chest, Shadow's head snapped around sharply. His ears stood rigid. His nose quivered as if he had caught an invisible thread in the air. Within seconds, the quiet growl rose into sharp, rapid barks that echoed across the airport floor. Travelers froze, some gasped. Others backed away instinctively. A grandmother with a baby was not the kind of person anyone expected a police dog to confront. Shadow's barking grew more insistent, his body stiff, eyes locked on the woman. He tugged at the leash, pulling his handler forward with force. Security officers closed in, their expressions confused. Why would a K-9 trained in explosives, narcotics, and danger zero in on a fragile-looking old woman with a child? The image alone seemed impossible, but Shadow's training had been flawless for years. He did not bark without reason. The woman clutched the baby tighter. Her face looked pale, her steps hesitant as officers blocked her path. Some passengers whispered in alarm. Could the baby be in danger? Was the grandmother hiding something? The scene grew tense, each second stretching longer than the last. The handler gave Shadow a hand signal to confirm. The dog lowered his head to the ground, circling tightly, nostrils flaring. Then he lunged again, this time toward the woman's side. His bark pierced louder than before, signaling an alert. Questions flooded everyone's mind. Was it the woman, the baby, or something she carried that no one could see? The officers urged her to step aside, gently but firmly, into a cleared area near security. The woman trembled, her lips moving silently, as if in prayer. The baby in her arms shifted, wrapped tightly in a thick blanket despite the warm terminal air. The tension was unbearable. Shadow pawed at the ground, whining now between barks, as if warning them not to ignore what he sensed. And then, just as an officer reached toward the blanket, the baby let out a faint, strangled cry. Not the usual sound of a child, but something weaker, strained. It sent a chill through the officers. Shadow barked again, harder, forcing the crowd into stunned silence. Something was not right. Whatever was hidden within that blanket was the reason Shadow had sounded the alarm. But what was it? The air inside the airport grew heavy as though the walls themselves were listening. The grandmother's trembling hands clutched the infant closer, her gaze darting nervously from officer to officer. No one dared to speak above a whisper, yet every eye in the crowded terminal remained fixed on her. Shadow didn't move. His paws pressed firm against the ground, his muscles coiled tight, his bark now sharp and rhythmic, demanding attention. His instincts screamed that something in the woman's arms was wrong. The officers surrounded her carefully, their training telling them to avoid sudden movements. The handler gave Shadow the focus command, and the dog's nose twitched violently as he stepped forward, almost brushing against the thick blanket. He whined low in his throat, circling, then stopped, head tilted, eyes pinned to the baby's chest. The faint cry came again, but this time officers noticed something that tightened the knot of tension in their stomachs. The sound didn't rise and fall like a normal baby's cry. It rattled, mechanical, almost muffled, as though filtered through something it shouldn't be. One officer exchanged a quick glance with another. The questions were immediate and terrifying. Was it really a baby? Could someone have disguised something dangerous under the appearance of an infant? If so, why would a grandmother be carrying it? Passengers stood on tiptoe from behind the barrier, some pressing phones to record. Security rushed to block cameras, but the scene had already captured the airport's attention. Mothers pulled their children closer. Fathers edged their families away. The unthinkable possibility spread like wildfire in whispers. The handler knelt beside Shadow, his hand steady on the leash. He knew his partner never gave false alarms. For the dog to react this violently meant one thing: whatever the woman carried posed a serious threat. The grandmother's lips trembled. "Please," she whispered, though her words barely reached the officers. Her eyes were wide with fear, not defiance. But was that fear of being caught, or fear of something else? An officer reached toward the bundle. The grandmother recoiled instinctively, clutching tighter. Shadow lunged forward, a furious bark erupting from his throat, his teeth snapping inches from the blanket. The handler pulled him back sharply, but the message was clear: don't ignore this. At last, the officer pried back the edge of the cloth. What he glimpsed inside made his heart pound faster. Wires. Thin, metallic strands snaked from beneath the baby's clothing. They were barely visible, tucked away carefully, but the sight alone was enough to chill the blood. The officer froze, his hand hovering midair. The grandmother's face crumpled, tears spilling as her body shook violently. "It's not what you think," she stammered, but the crowd couldn't hear her. Shadow barked again, relentless, his nose pressing closer as though to drag the truth into the open. The officers now faced an impossible question. Was this truly a baby strapped with something sinister? Or was there a darker secret buried beneath that trembling bundle? Whatever the truth was, Shadow had sensed it long before any human could, and they were about to find out. The terminal now felt like a pressure chamber. The discovery of wires beneath the blanket sent panic rippling through the officers, though none dared to show it. Passengers were quickly ushered farther back, barricades forming, while an announcement echoed overhead, calling for calm. Yet no one could take their eyes off the trembling grandmother and the bundle in her arms. Shadow's bark grew sharper, his body angled forward, tail stiff. Every fiber of his training screamed that the object in front of him was no ordinary threat. The grandmother sobbed openly now, her voice breaking as she repeated the same words. "Please, please, it's not what you think." Her hands trembled so badly the blanket shifted, revealing a flash of pale skin beneath small, fragile skin that undeniably belonged to a real baby. This only deepened the confusion. If it truly was a baby, why were wires running through its clothing? A bomb squad was called, their gear rushing toward the scene as passengers whispered frantically. Some swore it was a smuggling attempt. Others feared it was something far worse. The handler crouched closer to Shadow, giving the signal for steady. The dog stopped barking for the briefest second, nostrils flaring, then pressed his nose firmly against the child's chest. He let out a long, low whine, sound Shadow rarely made. To his handler, it meant urgency. Whatever was inside was not simply dangerous. It was immediate. The grandmother looked up through tears, her voice cracking. He is sick. I had no choice." Her words hit like static, drowned out by the noise around them, but the officers caught fragments. Sick? No choice? What could that mean? When the bomb technicians pried the blanket carefully, the sight stopped them cold. Nestled against the baby's chest was a small, blinking device strapped under the clothing. Wires trailed to tiny electrodes on the child's skin. It wasn't an explosive, not yet identifiable, but its presence was terrifying enough. The baby whimpered weakly, his breath shallow, almost unnatural. The grandmother clutched her hands together, pleading with her eyes for someone to understand. The bomb tech froze, waiting for orders. Shadow barked again, snapping them out of hesitation. He jerked his head toward the device, then back to the baby as though begging them to act before it was too late. One officer shouted for the medical team. Another demanded clearance of the area. The grandmother finally collapsed to her knees, rocking back and forth, whispering words only the baby seemed to hear. The truth was hanging in the air, just beyond reach. Every second stretched the suspense thinner, ready to snap. Shadow stood firm, eyes never leaving the baby. His instincts hadn't failed before, and they wouldn't now. The key to this entire mystery lay in the blinking device pressed against that fragile chest, and soon the reason behind his barking would finally come to light. The bomb squad inched closer, their movements precise and calculated. The blinking device strapped to the baby's chest drew every eye, the terminal holding its collective breath. Officers braced for the worst, but Shadow stood his ground, unwavering, focused, not with the aggression of an attack, but with the urgency of a dog that knew something no one else did. The grandmother clutched her chest, gasping through tears. "Please, he's dying. Please help him." Her words cracked through the tension like lightning. Dying? That device? The wires? It wasn't a bomb? The officers hesitated, torn between suspicion and compassion. But then the baby let out another frail, rattling cry. The sound thin, almost mechanical. His tiny chest rose unevenly, struggling for air. One of the medical responders finally recognized the pattern. His voice cut through the chaos. "That's not an explosive, it's a medical device." The grandmother sobbed, nodding rapidly. "A pacemaker. His heart. It's the only thing keeping him alive." The revelation hit the crowd like a tidal wave. Whispers turned into gasps. Relief began to spread, but so did guilt, because for a moment, everyone had believed the worst. The officers quickly confirmed. The wires weren't meant for destruction. They were part of a makeshift pediatric pacemaker system, crudely fitted but keeping the infant's tiny heart beating. It wasn't smuggling. It wasn't terror. It was desperation. The grandmother, through tears, explained in fragments. The baby had been born with a critical heart defect. They lived in a remote region where advanced medical care was non-existent. The device strapped to his chest was experimental, smuggled by relatives to keep him alive until surgery could be done. She had brought him to the United States hoping to reach specialists, terrified security would confiscate it if discovered. But Shadow had picked up what no one else could. The unusual signals, the faint metallic scent, the irregular heartbeat, and his bark had forced the truth into the open. The medical team rushed in, carefully securing the device, confirming it was stable. The baby whimpered again, but this time his breathing steadied as oxygen was provided. The grandmother's sobs softened into whispers of gratitude, her trembling hands finally loosening. Shadow sat back, chest rising and falling, his eyes locked on the child as though standing guard. The handler knelt beside him, pride swelling. Once again, Shadow's instincts had not been wrong. The tension in the terminal melted into applause. What had begun as a scene of fear ended in relief, the crowd recognizing the unlikely hero at the center of it all. The grandmother pressed her forehead against Shadow's fur, whispering broken thanks through tears. For her, the barking that had once terrified her had instead saved her grandson's life. And as the officers led her toward medical transport, the story came full circle. What seemed like a threat had been a cry for help, answered not by human suspicion, but by the unwavering instincts of a police dog who never stopped listening. Shadow's bark had revealed the truth. And this time, it wasn't about danger. It was about saving a life. And that's how one bark changed everything. Imagine missing stories like this, real moments where instincts save lives. Don't let the next one slip past you. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and be here when the next unbelievable story unfolds.